Everybody hates Doug, and honestly, they should. If Family Guy could snap one character out of existence, Doug would be the landslide winner. He strolled into the show out of nowhere, annoyed practically everyone with his cocky, know-it-all attitude, and then got tossed out just as randomly. What really made him unbearable was his rivalry with our beloved evil genius, Stewie. This is why Doug became Family Guy's most hated character, and why everyone was glad to see him go. Doug first showed up in Family Guy in Season 17, Episode 17, Island Adventure, when Stewie took Brian on a boat cruise to Garbage Island to retrieve his beloved big wheel bike, because of course, Peter had carelessly tossed it in the trash for the trash collectors. Doug was just some random kid who scooted by, called out to Stewie, and exchanged a few lines of playful banter before riding off.
Hey, Doug.
Hey, Stewie. Taking the big wheel out for a spin?
Yep, where are you headed?
Oh, I was just gonna drive through some puddles and see how long my tracks stay wet.
The record is 7 sidewalk squares by yours truly.
Allegedly.
Okay, get out of here, you nut.
That was it. Barely a minute of screen time. And at that point, fans didn't care. Doug was just another background character, barely worth a second thought. Viewers were far more interested in Stewie hilariously catching the stranded islanders up on years of world events using a tree diagram.
So people thought the dancing Judge Itos were funny?
For a while, yes.
Is Leno still doing it?
No, he's not hosting anymore.
Oh, so Conan got the Tonight Show?
Oh, come on.
Doug was a blink and you miss it moment, nothing more. And honestly, we might have assumed we'd never see him again. But then he came back. This time it was in the final episode of Season 20, an episode where the Griffins let Principal Shepard crash at their house, and Stewie was raking in a fortune by writing children's books that portrayed Brian as a clueless, bumbling idiot. And then, out of nowhere, Doug rolled in again. Now, when he showed up again, most viewers probably had to pause for a second and ask, who's this kid again? I mean, I did. He had been nothing more than a fleeting background character before, and Family Guy isn't exactly known for bringing minor characters back unless they serve a real purpose. But once again, his interaction with Stewie seemed harmless. Another casual exchange, more playful teasing, nothing that hinted at a serious rivalry. Doug was just some kid borrowing a shovel to dig a hole to China, while Stewie mowed the lawn and made ridiculous pretend noises.
This is real because I'm making the motor noise.
Hey there, Stewie. Finally cutting that grass, I see.
Well, if someone had returned my mower when they said they were going to, I would have done it weeks ago.
Whoa, I see the mower isn't the only thing running hot. But speaking of, I need to borrow a shovel. I'm digging a hole.
A hole? Where are you going? China?
That's the hope.
All right, well, I'll be checking your Instagram.
The conversation was lighthearted, playful, and not to forget that Doug would later send pictures to Stewie showing he successfully dug his way to China. If that had been his only shtick, a background kid who scoots in and scoots out, there wouldn't have been a problem. That was not the last of Doug that we saw. He kept coming back, but this time, it was no longer friendly banter, but a rivalry with Stewie that seemed to come out of nowhere. And the more he interacted with Stewie, his only real conversation partner, the more Family Guy fans started to realize something. This kid sucked. Doug's smug arrogance, forced rivalry with Stewie, and complete lack of charm made him one of the most frustratingly unlikable characters the show had introduced in years. Before we go on, we have to find out who Doug is and what's his deal exactly. Doug was a short, brown-haired toddler with a clean, almost too perfect appearance. He looked like the kind of kid whose parents insisted on ironing his daycare uniform. His voice had the better-than-you-all soft-spoken yet arrogant cadence, and was just dripping with smugness. He was voiced by Chris Parnell, who also voices Jerry in Rick and Morty. Chris brought that same blend of sophistication and clueless self-importance to Doug.
Jerry Smith, father of the bride's friend. Advertising's my usual game, but I'm between...
Jerry, stop networking.
When Doug started appearing more frequently, especially in Season 19, his interactions with Stewie started shifting. The playful exchanges they had before gave way to something more openly condescending. It wasn't like they had any real backstory for it. Doug just decided to start throwing shade at Stewie, and it didn't feel natural. At first, Doug was just another background kid, but his role as Stewie's daycare rival changed that. He wasn't merely part of the mix, he was positioned as Stewie's counterpoint, a toddler who saw himself as smarter, sharper, and more refined. On one hand, the dynamic had potential. A pompous kid trying to outshine Stewie could have been fun, but the execution fell flat. Instead of developing naturally, Doug's smug attitude appeared out of nowhere, as if the show abruptly decided, this kid is Stewie's enemy now, just go with it. The result? A rivalry that felt completely forced. A prime example was Susie's christening. Stewie was sitting alone, minding his own business when Doug walked up, and right away, Stewie knew he was about to brag about something. It's difficult to tell at first whether it's envy from Stewie or exasperation, but sure enough, Stewie predicted he would brag about his race car bed, and Doug hit him with the line.
Hey, Stewie. Still sleeping in the slow lane?
Okay.
Credit where it's due, that was good wordplay. It was the first clear sign that the writers were trying to push this rivalry, but what went wrong with the setup was that Doug won the banter. He hit Stewie with a jab about his combing his hair, mocking him for being bald, and Stewie actually admitted to feeling ridiculed. Usually, the undisputed master of insults actually lost that exchange. And that was the problem. A kid with barely a minute of screen time before this outbantered Stewie Griffin, the king of savage comebacks? The baby who once verbally obliterated Brian so hard that he curled up on the floor in existential crisis? Doug was not supposed to win. There he was, walking away with the last word, while Stewie sat there, humiliated.
All the urinals are at mouth level.
I don't look at those. I'm too busy fixing my hair in the mirror. Oh, I'm sorry. Ciao, Stewie.
God, that was humiliating.
But Stewie didn't stop there. He had to find a way to rub it in, chasing Doug down just to gloat that his father Peter had been named the new godfather. But since when did Stewie crave validation, especially from someone so clearly beneath him in both intellect and ruthlessness? It was completely out of character. Instead of proving his superiority, Stewie walked straight into humiliation. Doug effortlessly flipped the situation, making Stewie look foolish in front of other kids. Worse, his taunts backfired spectacularly when he unknowingly mocked Doug's parents. As it turned out, were in the middle of a divorce. The result? The other kids turned on him, leaving Stewie looking less like a mastermind and more like the butt of the joke.
Stewie, my parents are trying to make it work.
Gee, Stewie, they're doing their best. He ended things with a nanny. Not that it's any of your business.
Oh, yeah. Good for them.
The next time we see Doug is in the later episode of The Marrying Kind, where he rolls in on his big wheel, because of course he does, just to take another jab at Stewie over his wife leaving him.
Oh, I heard about Splitsville. That's why I prefer the bachelor life. Just me, my big wheel, and the doll I draw private parts on.
I hear you.
But the worst part? It's not just Doug's condescension, it's Stewie's actually showing jealousy. Jealous of Doug.
God, he's so cool, I hate it. Well, there's only one thing left for me to do. You can take this job and— Surprise!
How does that even make sense in the Family Guy world, where Stewie is intellectually superior and more charismatic than literally everyone else? Mind you, this is the same Stewie who's taken down Chris's bullies, rescued Meg from kidnappers, and sniped a woman for annoying Lois. So what could possibly be more badass than that? Somehow, we're supposed to believe that a smug kid on a plastic tricycle has him spiraling into insecurity? Family Guy spent years crafting Stewie as a brilliant, ruthless, and effortlessly hilarious character, yet out of nowhere, Doug was presented as his equal. No build-up, no justification, just a random kid suddenly written to outmatch Stewie in banter. Without an established history or earned credibility, his role as a rival felt forced. At no point does Doug ever feel like a legitimate threat to Stewie, which makes their interactions frustrating rather than funny. Compare this to someone like Bertram. That was a rival who actually worked. He wasn't just a one-note smug rich kid, he was Stewie's genetic half-brother, a character who naturally brought out Stewie's darker, more competitive instincts. Their battles felt earned, their dynamic was interesting, and most importantly, Bertram actually felt like a threat. Their confrontations had stakes, and Bertram himself had motivation. Their intelligence and ruthlessness made for an exciting and fierce rivalry. Doug, on the other hand, isn't a real threat. He's just there. He doesn't challenge Stewie in any meaningful way, he just annoys him. Even Olivia had a better and more entertaining dynamic with Stewie because she was equally as ambitious and pretentious, making their interactions feel like a natural competition.
Oh, ask Olivia. Olivia, the three of us are having a great time. What's your problem?
My problem is you. You're acting like a baby.
And we come to the center of the shrubbery maze. That's what it all comes down to, isn't it? I'm not grown up enough for you.
Well, you are a baby, aren't you?
Stay out of it, stay out of it. Well, if you think I'm a baby, then perhaps I should act like a baby. Where?
Family Guy has no shortage of smug characters. Brian, Carter Pewterschmidt, even Quagmire when he's feeling self-righteous. But the difference is that they either have redeeming qualities or their arrogance is played for laughs. Brian is hypocritical, but occasionally well-meaning. Carter is despicable, but at least he has money to back up his ego and is totally hilarious and enjoyable.
Hey, fat ass, you like this bus bench? It's okay. All right, that's good enough for me. I'm smashing it.
Fans didn't get this with Doug. The blame here falls squarely on the Family Guy writers, but instead of calling them out, Doug takes all the heat. For good reason too. Even in Meg Goes to College, when Brian turns to Doug for fitness help, Doug's immediate reaction isn't just to take over, but to bask in Stewie's humiliation. The second he sees a chance to make himself look superior, he takes it. He has almost nothing else going on for him.
Stewie, it's an Doug moment. No hard feelings. I think Brian here just wants to rev up to a higher octane.
See you around, Stewie.
So, it might take me a little longer to train you, Brian. You're going to have to unlearn everything Stewie taught you. Fortunately, that was almost nothing.
Oh, man.
Then the writers tried to make us care by giving Doug some kind of personal struggle, but even this attempt felt forced and failed just as miserably. This happened in LASIK Instinct, the first episode of Family Guy's 20th season. Lois's vision is bad, and so while dropping Stewie off at preschool, she accidentally hits Doug with her car.
Oh my God, please be a dog. Please be a dog.
Ow! Ow!
Oh my God, it's a kid.
It's Doug. Nice hit, bitch. Oh, and Elsa underwear. This day just keeps getting better.
Stewie celebrating this should have been hilarious, but the way it played out felt off. If Stewie wants to put down a rival, he never lacks the means or creativity. Him simply cheering over Doug getting hit? That was too infantile, too simplistic for a character who's always been witty, calculated, and inventive. It stripped him of the sharpness that makes him fun. But at this point, I sound like a broken record. After the accident, Lois invites Doug's parents over to apologize and make amends, but this is where we learn the real reason Doug is the way he is. His parents barely acknowledge him. The relationship is practically non-existent, strained to the point of collapse, and Doug, unfortunately, is the one suffering the consequences of their neglect. Doug's parents make Lois build him a tree house and look after the kid, but Doug manipulates the Griffins into spending more time with him just so he can experience what an involved family looks like. The Griffins soon find out they've been played by Doug, but before they get to fully call him out on it, they see how Doug's father arrives and brushes the kid off just to spend time with his mistress.
Hey, I got your message about the miscarriage. So, Saturday night?
What a dick. You know what?
This creates some emotional moment that makes the Griffins understand and feel for Doug. Stewie and Doug share an understanding and agree to keep their beef toward each other away from their personal lives. On paper, this should have been a meaningful moment, a glimpse into why Doug acts the way he does. Maybe his smug arrogance is a cover for deep insecurity. Maybe his constant need to one-up Stewie comes from trying to prove his worth to inattentive parents. Could have been the depth his character desperately needed. Instead of letting this develop naturally, the episode just shrugs it off. Doug's emotional reveal is played for a quick gag, and by the end, nothing changes. He's still the same arrogant, one-note rival, and the show immediately resets him back to default mode. No growth, no lasting impact, just a shallow attempt to make him sympathetic before throwing him right back into his usual shtick. And that's the core issue. The show wants us to care about Doug, but it refuses to put in the work to make him worth caring about. And it gets even worse. In 80s Guy, Doug once again swoops in and steals the spotlight from Stewie, this time by effortlessly outperforming him in tumbling class, despite having no prior experience. But the Family Guy writers, dead set on forcing this rivalry, know that simply having Doug be better isn't enough to sell him as Stewie's equal. In a lazy attempt to solidify the dynamic, they make the other kids openly acknowledge this supposed rivalry between Stewie and Doug.
So unless there's an unexpected appearance from a rival baby?
Perhaps I could take a shot.
It's Doug!
That's Stewie's rival.
As the episode progresses, Stewie once again is thrown into a desperate attempt to redeem himself. He decides to prove his bravery when a frisbee gets stuck at the top of the jungle gym. He boldly announces that he'll climb up the next day to retrieve it. Doug shows up again, ready to challenge him, turning this into yet another petty competition. So now, the two are stuck in this ridiculous upward race to the top. Along the way, Stewie reaches the frisbee first, but in a moment of bad luck, his foot gets stuck and a storm starts rolling in. Forced to take shelter together, they once again share a moment of honesty. Something they already did in the previous episode, only for Doug to go right back to antagonizing Stewie afterward. And then comes the moment that makes Doug even more insufferable. For reasons beyond comprehension, opens up about his jealousy of Doug and how he has always sought his approval.
I've always wanted your approval. But now, tonight, you've given me something much more valuable. Your friendship. Here, you can have it.
What?
The setup makes absolutely no sense. Why would Stewie, intellectual genius, inventor, and all-around better character, feel insecure over Doug, a kid whose entire personality revolves around being a smug rich boy on a big wheel? Fine, let's go with it. For Doug's part, he admits that he acts like a jerk and constantly shows Stewie up because he's intimidated by his brilliance and is envious of his minimal hair. That last part, which was most certainly a shade than a compliment. But then Doug, of course, does what Doug does best, proves he's still a jerk. Stewie, in a rare act of humility, hands Doug the frisbee as a gesture of goodwill, signaling that he wants to move past their rivalry. And Doug, he immediately betrays him, smugly revealing that it was all a trick to get the frisbee. He then scurries down the jungle gym, eager to humiliate Stewie in front of the other kids.
Run! Other kids, Stewie lost and he deserves our ridicule.
Hey, whoa, wait!
And you wonder why fans hate this kid? But Stewie isn't about to let this slide. He frees himself and chases after Doug, leading to an all-out scuffle over the frisbee. In a surprising turn, when Doug loses the grip and is about to fall, Stewie, despite every reason not to, grabs onto his arm and refuses to let him drop. Then, in typical Family Guy fashion, the tension is immediately undercut by the reveal that they were never in any real danger. The jungle gym wasn't as high up as they thought. The episode ends with Stewie imagining their adventure being made into a movie, but in the final insult, when casting is announced, Stewie is played by a random, non-heroic actor, while Doug gets the cooler Chris Pine.
Hey, who knows? Maybe someday they'll make a movie about us.
This summer, don't miss Jungle Jim Mountain, starring Chris Pine as Doug.
What?
And Paul Giamatti as Stewie.
Come on!
Help! I crapped my pants.
And if you thought this meant their rivalry had finally been put to rest, couldn't be more wrong. Doug is still Doug. And in the very next episode, Brief Encounter, he takes things even further, this time by framing Stewie for a crime he didn't even commit. Here's how that all went down. Lois gives Stewie a stuffed monkey, which sparks some tension in his relationship with Rupert. While venting to Doug, he finds out that Doug has a similar problem, and together, they hatch a brilliantly terrible plan. Each of them will take care of the other's problem, ensuring nothing can be traced back to them. Solid plan, right? Except Doug actually follows through on his end of the deal, while Stewie discovers that his assignment isn't just about getting rid of a stuffed toy, it's about killing a real, living cat.
Miss Tiggy Winkles is a real cat!
Naturally, Stewie backs out, refusing to go through with it. But later, he finds out the cat is already dead. And guess who took a picture of him at the scene of the crime? Now armed with incriminating evidence, Doug gleefully blackmails Stewie for a murder he may or may not have committed himself. Now desperate to clear his name, does everything he can to retrieve the photo, but in the middle of their little war, they run into another kid, Tyler, who openly mocks Doug. And suddenly, it's clear, Doug already has a rival. Tyler is where he belongs, not with Stewie.
Later, losers. I'm 5.
Who is that?
That's Tyler. He's, kind of my Doug.
Boy, we all get a Doug, huh?
Yeah, Tyler's Doug is a drunk stepdad.
Yikes.
Yeah.
So that established the fact that Doug's only role was to show up, be smug, and insufferable. And that's the real issue here. The writers were clearly trying to tone down how adult Stewie's character had become. By putting him in daycare more often, they were giving him a new dynamic outside of Brian and Chris. And that makes sense. Stewie can't spend every episode hanging out with grown-ups. But the problem, and what everyone seemed to agree on, is that Doug just didn't fit that role. He wasn't an interesting counterbalance to Stewie. He wasn't compelling. He wasn't worthy of being Stewie's rival. And so rather than death ray guns, Stewie was giving nosebleeds.
Doug, are you okay? Oh my God, what happened? Who did this to you?
Stewie!
Stuart Griffin Suarez, is that true?
But thankfully, this all came to an end. Just as he showed up out of nowhere, Doug left as well, more accurately, was killed off and off-screen. In The Candidate, Doug is running unopposed for snack captain after his only competitor, Noah, is taken out of the race by foot and mouth disease. But when Stewie learns that the position could be a stepping stone to eventually becoming mayor, he decides to challenge Doug.
Stewie Griffin is now running for snack captain, and I will defeat that jerk, Doug.
Both boys launch their campaigns, with Stewie taking it dead seriously. He recruits Chris as his campaign manager and even enlists college students to run his campaign board. But as expected, Doug doesn't play fair. Instead, he launches a damaging campaign against Stewie, spreading the scandalous claim that he poops his pants. A revelation that sends the other kids into fits of laughter. Here's the twist. Doug is actually the real pants pooper. Yeah, that was just as gross to say as it was to see.
My God, is Doug pooping his pants? What a godsend! We'll call him Poopy Doopy Doug. He'll never shake it. He surged in the polls?
It humanized him, made him more relatable.
Well, two can play at that game.
Desperate to fight back, Stewie digs for dirt on Doug, only for Doug to one-up him again, exposing that Stewie was actually a whoops baby, aka an accident. At this point, Stewie's practically finished, his campaign is in shambles, but then, just like that, he walks into the Griffin home as the triumphant winner, almost as an afterthought, casually announces that Doug died in a commuter plane crash.
I mean, that's the story I would have told this week, but whatever. Oh, and Doug died in a commuter plane crash this morning.
And that's it. That's how Doug's story ends. No satisfying defeat, no moment where Stewie outsmarts him, just an offhanded remark about his sudden death. Naturally, this raises a few questions. Was Doug really killed off for good? Or is he just another character who will eventually be brought back? Family Guy has a habit of randomly killing off characters, only to have them reappear like nothing happened. Case in point, earlier in the same episode, Joe is literally executed by the military for asking too many questions.
Does the military have...
He was asking too many questions.
Just a few scenes later, he's back, dancing with Peter and the guys like nothing ever happened. Since the announcement of his death, he hasn't appeared in a single episode, which does make it seem like his demise was final. It's just as uneventful as his entire time on the show. As a fan on Reddit rightly pointed out, Doug feels like a symbol of new Family Guy, one-dimensional and built entirely around a single gimmick. He's essentially a Stewie clone, but stripped of everything that makes Stewie compelling. He's Stewie but rich, Stewie but a bigger jerk, Stewie but inexplicably more popular, but unlike Stewie, he doesn't feel authentic. He's just a mechanical plot device for the same repetitive joke. Doug does X better than Stewie, and that's it. The punchline never evolves beyond that. Classic Family Guy gave characters layers, even in its absurd world. Brian was a liberal intellectual but also a lazy hypocrite. Lois was the too-good-for-Peter wife, but had her own moral failings. Even one-note characters like Herbert the Pervert worked because his shtick was played cleverly. Doug, however, exists solely to antagonize Stewie, and that's where the writing fails. Every joke follows the same formula, an obstacle arises, Doug takes the easy way out, Stewie actually learns something, and then admits defeat. It's lazy, predictable, and worst of all, completely uninspired. If you want to see which other characters are hated in Family Guy, take a look at this video on the most hated versus the most loved Family Guy characters.